On a crisp autumn morning in Burlington, Vermont, Judge William Harrison settled into his leather chair in courtroom 3B, just as he had done for the past 15 years. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. At 56, with grained temples and wire-rimmed glasses, he carried himself with the stern authority that had become his trademark. "Next case," he called out, his voice echoing through the half-empty courtroom. Dr. Maya Richardson stepped forward, her shoulders straight despite her obvious exhaustion. She had just returned from a 3-week research trip to Southeast Asia the night before, and her usual professional attire was replaced by comfortable travel clothes, jeans, a simple black sweater, and worn sneakers. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and dark circles under her eyes testified to her jet lag. The court clerk announced, "Case number 247, parking violation on Church Street, expired meter." Judge Harrison barely glanced up from his papers, his eyes skimming over Maya's casual appearance. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly downward. "Name?" he asked, his tone clipped and impatient. "Dr. Maya Richardson," she responded clearly, standing at the podium. The judge's pen paused briefly at the title, but he didn't look up. "And how do you plead to the parking violation?" "Your Honor, if I may explain," Maya began, her voice steady and articulate. "I had just returned from an international flight and was picking up some essential documents from my colleague's office. I put money in the meter, but due to unexpected delays with campus security." Judge Harrison cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Ms. Richardson, a simple guilty or not guilty will suffice." Maya took a deep breath, noting how he had deliberately ignored her title. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge finally looked up, his blue eyes cold. "Ms. Richardson, the parking enforcement officer's photo clearly shows your vehicle at an expired meter at 2:47 p.m. Are you suggesting the evidence is incorrect?" "No, Your Honor, but there were extenuating circumstances that—" "The law doesn't recognize extenuating circumstances for expired meters, Ms. Richardson," he interrupted again, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made several observers in the courtroom shift uncomfortably. "This is a simple matter. Either you fed the meter or you didn't." Maya stood her ground, her fingers gripping the podium slightly tighter. "Your Honor, if you would allow me to explain the full situation." "I've heard enough," Judge Harrison declared, shuffling his papers. "This court sees dozens of people every day trying to excuse their violations. The rules apply equally to everyone." He emphasized the last word with a slight edge to his voice. A young public defender in the back of the courtroom frowned and started taking notes on her yellow legal pad. "Given your apparent reluctance to accept responsibility for your actions," Judge Harrison continued, "I'm imposing the maximum fine of $250, due within 30 days. He banged his gavel with more force than necessary. Maya blinked, surprised by the harsh penalty for a first-time parking violation that typically resulted in a $50 fine. She opened her mouth to speak but thought better of it, remembering the stack of papers waiting on her desk at the university, papers that would soon make this morning's interaction particularly interesting. "Next case," Judge Harrison called out, already looking past her. As Maya turned to leave, she noticed an elderly white woman being called up for the same violation. She paused at the courtroom door just long enough to hear the judge's considerably warmer tone and the subsequent $25 fine with a payment plan option. Outside the courthouse, Maya stood for a moment in the autumn breeze, watching leaves dance across the courthouse steps. A slight smile played across her lips as she checked her watch. She had exactly 2 hours before she needed to be at Vermont State University's Maxwell Hall, where she would be introduced as their visiting scholar from Oxford University, leading a prestigious international law symposium. She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. "Hello, Dean Matthews?" "Yes, I just finished at the courthouse." "No, it was quite educational, actually." "Yes, I'll be there for the faculty meeting. Though I have to say, I believe it's going to be far more interesting than anyone expected." As she walked to her car, Maya's mind wasn't on the unfair fine or the judge's condescending attitude. Instead, she was thinking about how this morning's incident would fit perfectly into her upcoming lecture series on implicit bias in the justice system. Sometimes, she reflected, the best lessons come from unexpected places. Later that afternoon, Judge William Harrison strode through the elegant halls of Vermont State University's Maxwell Hall. He tugged at his tie, feeling somewhat out of place among the academics, but his position on the university's legal advisory board required his attendance at certain faculty meetings. The mahogany-paneled walls and portraits of distinguished scholars seemed to watch him as he made his way to the conference room. "Ah, Bill. Glad you could make it," Dean Matthews called out, waving him into the packed room. The judge nodded, taking one of the few remaining seats near the front. He noticed several unfamiliar faces among the usual faculty members, likely visiting professors and guest speakers. Dean Matthews moved to the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our regular agenda, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing someone quite extraordinary." He beamed at the assembled crowd. "We are incredibly fortunate to have secured one of Oxford University's most brilliant minds for our International Law Symposium this semester." Judge Harrison pulled out his phone, only half listening as he checked his afternoon court schedule. "Dr. Richardson has published groundbreaking research on implicit bias in global judicial systems," Dean Matthews continued. "Her work has been cited by the United Nations and has influenced legal reform in 12 countries. She's chosen our university for her next major research project, and we couldn't be more honored." The judge's head snapped up at the name Richardson, a slight uneasiness creeping into his stomach. "Please join me in welcoming Dr. Maya Richardson," Dean Matthews announced, gesturing toward the side door. The room erupted in applause as Maya entered, now dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and carrying herself with quiet confidence. Judge Harrison's face drained of color as he recognized the woman he had fined just hours earlier. She walked to the podium with measured steps, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "Thank you, Dean Matthews," Maya began, her voice carrying the same articulate tone she had used in court, but now everyone was listening. "Before I discuss my research, I'd like to share a fascinating experience I had this morning that perfectly illustrates why this work matters." The judge's hands grew cold as he gripped the armrests of his chair. Several people noticed his distress, including Dean Matthews, who looked between him and Dr. Richardson with growing curiosity. In fact, Maya continued, making eye contact with Judge Harrison, "I believe we have someone in the room who can speak to this firsthand." She didn't name him directly, but her meaning was clear to everyone who had been in court that morning. The next 30 minutes were excruciating for Judge Harrison as he listened to Dr. Richardson present her impressive credentials. She had earned her doctorate from Oxford at 26, had advised Supreme Courts on 3 continents, and was currently leading a global study on judicial reform. Her handling of the morning's incident was masterful. She never directly mentioned it, but every example she cited of systemic bias hit uncomfortably close to home. During the brief break that followed her presentation, Judge Harrison watched as faculty members crowded around Dr. Richardson, eager to speak with her. He overheard fragments of their conversations. Groundbreaking methodology, unprecedented access to international court data, potential to reshape judicial training globally. The judge sat alone, his coffee growing cold as he recalled his dismissive treatment of her that morning. Each passing minute made his actions seem more egregious, more obviously biased. He thought of the elderly white woman he had treated so differently in the very next case. "Judge Harrison?" Dean Matthews appeared beside him, his expression concerned. "Is everything all right? You look a bit pale." Before he could respond, Dr. Richardson approached their table, several professors in tow. "Judge Harrison," she said pleasantly, extending her hand. "I believe we met this morning, though we didn't have the opportunity for a proper introduction." The room grew quieter as others noticed the interaction. Judge Harrison stood slowly, his legal confidence entirely evaporated. "Dr. Richardson," he managed to say, taking her offered hand. I believe I owe you an apology." "Perhaps," she replied diplomatically, "we could discuss it after my lecture on implicit bias in the American judicial system tomorrow. I believe you'll find it quite relevant to your work." Her smile was professional, but her eyes held a challenge. The judge nodded, acutely aware of the whispers spreading through the room. As he excused himself early from the meeting, he could feel the weight of dozens of eyes following him out, much like he had watched Dr. Richardson leave his courtroom that morning. News travels fast in small cities, and Burlington, Vermont was no exception. By the next morning, the story of Judge Harrison's courthouse encounter with Dr. Richardson had spread through both the legal and academic communities like wildfire. Local reporter Sarah Chen sat at her desk at the Burlington Daily Press, fingers flying across her keyboard as she worked on the story that would soon make headlines. Judge's maximum fine backfires. Visiting Oxford scholar highlights judicial bias, the draft headline read. Sarah had spent the evening interviewing witnesses from the courtroom, including Maria Gonzalez, the young public defender who had taken detailed notes during the incident. It was textbook discrimination, Maria told her, sharing the yellow legal pad where she had documented the stark difference in treatment between Dr. Richardson and the elderly white woman who followed. I've seen subtle bias before, but this was blatant. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Harrison's regular morning docket felt different. The usual crowd of lawyers lounged near his courtroom, but their conversations hushed when he walked past. His clerk, Tom, handed him the morning's files with an uncomfortable expression. "Sir," Tom hesitated, "there's something you should see." He placed a copy of the university paper on the judge's desk. A photo of Dr. Richardson speaking at the faculty meeting was prominently displayed next to an older photo of Judge Harrison. The headline read, "Prestigious Oxford scholar encounters local bias." As Judge Harrison sank into his chair, his phone buzzed with a message from his daughter, Rachel, a civil rights attorney in Boston. "Dad, we need to talk. This isn't good." Across town at Vermont State University, Dr. Richardson's morning lecture was packed. Students sat in the aisles, and several local judges had slipped in at the back of the hall. She began her presentation by pulling up a graph showing disparities in traffic court fines across racial and socioeconomic lines. Yesterday, she addressed the crowded room. "I became more than just a researcher of these statistics. I became one of them." Her voice was steady as she shared her experience, using it to illuminate larger patterns of systemic bias. In the audience, Professor James Wilson, head of the law department, leaned over to whisper to his colleague, "This could be exactly what we needed to push through those judicial reform proposals." By lunchtime, local TV stations had picked up the story. Dr. Richardson's phone kept buzzing with interview requests, which she politely declined. "This isn't about one judge or one incident," she explained to her research assistant. "It's about patterns that need to be addressed systematically." The university's administration called an emergency meeting. Dean Matthews paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, President Garcia, I understand the sensitivity of the situation. Yes, Dr. Richardson is handling it with complete professionalism. Actually, she suggested using this as a catalyst for our new judicial education program." Back in his chambers, Judge Harrison tried to focus on his cases, but his mind kept wandering. The morning's defendants seemed to study him more carefully than usual, and he found himself second-guessing every decision. During a brief recess, he pulled up Dr. Richardson's published works on his computer, starting to read her research on how quick judgments and inherent biases affected judicial decisions. By late afternoon, community leaders had begun to respond. Reverend James Thompson from the First Baptist Church announced a town hall meeting to discuss bias in the local justice system. The Vermont Bar Association issued a statement promising to review their judicial training programs. Dr. Richardson spent her evening in her temporary office at the university, reviewing emails from scholars worldwide. Many shared similar stories, offering their data and support for an expanded study. As she looked out her window at the sunset over Lake Champlain, her phone rang again. This time, it was the state's Chief Justice. "Dr. Richardson," the Chief Justice began, "I believe what happened yesterday presents an opportunity. Would you be willing to help us design a new training program for our judges?" As day turned to dusk, Judge Harrison sat alone in his now empty courtroom. The familiar space felt different as he replayed the previous day's events in his mind. On his desk lay the university paper, Dr. Richardson's dignified photo seeming to watch him as he contemplated how a routine traffic case had turned into a moment of professional crisis. And perhaps, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet, an opportunity for real change. Sleep eluded Judge William Harrison that night. He sat in his home office at 2 a.m., surrounded by stacks of his past case files, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed years of his own decisions. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed, too absorbed in the disturbing patterns emerging from his research. The soft glow of his desk lamp illuminated spreadsheets showing his sentencing history. The numbers didn't lie. African American defendants consistently received higher fines, longer sentences, and fewer alternative sentencing options. He rubbed his tired eyes, remembering faces, cases, lives he had affected with what he had always considered sound judicial discretion. "Dad!" His daughter Rachel's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, still in her business suit from the flight from Boston. "Mom called me, said you haven't been sleeping." William looked up at his daughter, a successful civil rights attorney who had often challenged his traditional views at family dinners. "Rachel, I didn't expect you until tomorrow." "It is tomorrow, Dad. It's 2 a.m. She moved into the office, picking up one of his case summaries. Her eyes scanned the document, her expression growing serious. "Finally reviewing your record." "I've been fair," he started to say, but the words felt hollow. "At least, I thought I was being fair." Rachel pulled up a chair beside him. "Remember when I was in law school, and I tried to tell you about implicit bias? You said I was being too sensitive, that justice was blind." The judge stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the quiet street below. "I presided over thousands of cases, Rachel. If what these numbers show is true, then you've been part of the problem," Rachel finished quietly. "But Dad, that's not the end of the story. It's where you start fixing it." William turned back to his daughter, seeing in her face the same determination that had driven her to become a lawyer despite his initial disapproval. "Dr. Richardson's research, I've been reading it all evening. The patterns she's identified, they're right here in my own courtroom." Rachel nodded, picking up more of his analysis sheets. "These disparities in traffic court fines. How did you never notice?" "Because I didn't want to," he admitted, the words feeling like stones in his throat. "It was easier to believe I was being objective, that each case was different, that there were always legitimate reasons for my decisions." His computer pinged with a new email, another news outlet requesting comment on the incident with Dr. Richardson. He'd been declining all interviews, knowing anything he said would likely make things worse. "You know what really keeps me awake," he said, sinking back into his chair. "It's not just the big cases, it's the small ones, the everyday decisions. How many people's lives have I made harder because of my biases?" Rachel supplied. "We all have them, Dad. The question is what we do once we recognize them." William picked up a particular file, a case from 3 months ago where he had denied bail to a young black man for a minor offense while granting it to a white defendant in a similar case the same day. "I need to make this right." Rachel squeezed his shoulder. "Starting with Dr. Richardson." "She's just the tip of the iceberg," he replied, gesturing at the files spread across his desk. "This needs to be bigger than one apology." As dawn began to color the sky outside, father and daughter worked together, reviewing cases, identifying patterns, and drafting what would become a proposal for systematic changes in the court's procedures. Rachel's legal pad filled with notes. Mandatory bias training, regular review of sentencing patterns, community oversight committees, revised bail guidelines. Around 6 a.m., William found a particular case file that made him pause. It was from 10 years ago, Rachel's first appearance in his courtroom as a civil rights attorney. She had argued passionately about systemic bias, and he had dismissed her arguments as young lawyers' idealism. "I should have listened to you back then," he said softly. Rachel looked up from her notes. "You're listening now, Dad. That's what matters." As the morning light filled his office, Judge William Harrison began to see his life's work in a new light, not as a record of achievement, but as a lesson in humility and a call to change. The question was no longer whether bias existed in his courtroom, but what he would do to address it. Dr. Maya Richardson stood at the podium in Vermont State University's largest lecture hall, facing an audience that had grown far beyond what anyone had expected. Local judges, lawyers, community leaders, and students filled every seat, with more people standing along the walls. The incident with Judge Harrison had created an opportunity she hadn't anticipated, but she was determined to make it count. "Today," she began, her voice clear and purposeful, "we're not here to discuss a single incident in traffic court. We're here to talk about transforming our entire judicial system." She clicked to her first slide, showing statistics from her global research. Burlington isn't unique. These patterns exist everywhere. The question is, who's ready to change them? In the front row, Professor Wilson nodded encouragingly. Next to him sat representatives from the Vermont Bar Association and 3 members of the state Supreme Court. Local news cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking steadily. "I'm proposing a comprehensive study of our local justice system," Maya continued, outlining her plan. "But this isn't just another academic research project. We're creating a partnership between the university, the courts, and the community." She clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed timeline. Phase 1 begins with data collection. Every court decision, every fine, every sentence will be analyzed. Phase 2 implements new training programs and procedures. Phase 3 measures the results. In the audience, Reverend Thompson raised his hand. "Dr. Richardson, how will this help people who've already been affected by biased decisions?" Maya smiled. "An excellent question. Part of our proposal includes a review board to examine past cases where bias may have played a role." She paused, making eye contact with various community leaders. "We're not just studying the problem, we're fixing it." The dean of the law school stood up. "The university is prepared to commit resources to this initiative. We've already received calls from 3 major foundations interested in funding the project." As Maya continued her presentation, her phone buzzed silently in her pocket. More messages from other universities wanting to implement similar programs. The incident in traffic court had struck a nerve nationally, becoming a symbol of both the problem and the possibility for change. "We need volunteers from every part of our community," she explained, pointing to sign-up sheets at the back of the hall. "Judges, lawyers, community members, students. Everyone has a role to play." The energy in the room was palpable. People were taking notes, nodding, whispering to each other. This wasn't just another academic presentation. It felt like the start of something bigger. Sarah Chen from the Burlington Daily Press raised her hand. "What kind of resistance do you expect to face?" "Change is never easy," Maya acknowledged. "Some people will say the system is fine as it is. Others will say change is too difficult or too expensive. But look around this room." She gestured to the diverse crowd. "I see judges sitting next to community activists, law students next to police officers. Change happens when people are ready for it." After the presentation, Maya found herself surrounded by volunteers. A group of law students wanted to help with data collection. Local judges offered access to their records. Community leaders proposed town hall meetings to gather public input. Professor Wilson approached with an excited smile. "Dr. Richardson, the state Supreme Court Chief Justice wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're interested in implementing your program statewide." Maya nodded, checking her calendar on her phone. Between the messages from other universities and requests for interviews, her schedule was filling up fast, but she remained focused on Burlington. This was where it would start. Later that evening, as she packed up her materials, Maya noticed a new email from Judge Harrison. He had attached his own analysis of his past cases, along with a proposal for immediate changes in his courtroom procedures. The subject line read, "Ready to be part of the solution." Walking to her car in the cool evening air, Maya reflected on how a simple parking ticket had evolved into something so much larger. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Oxford University. They wanted to expand her research to include courts across Europe. One step at a time, she murmured to herself, looking back at the university building where tomorrow the real work would begin. The lights were still on in many offices, where volunteers had already started organizing data and planning next steps. What had started as a confrontation was transforming into a collaboration, and Maya Richardson was ready to lead the way. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Maya's temporary office at Vermont State University as she waited for Judge Harrison's arrival. She had agreed to meet with him privately before their scheduled public meeting with the Reform Committee. Her desk was covered with data from his court cases, 15 years of decisions laid bare in charts and graphs. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock on her door. Judge Harrison stood there, looking different from the imposing figure who had sat on the bench just days ago. He seemed older somehow, more human in his simple gray suit without his judicial robes. "Dr. Richardson," he said quietly, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Maya gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit down, Judge Harrison." She noticed he carried a thick folder under his arm, his own research, she guessed. The judge settled into the chair, placing the folder on her desk. "I've spent the last few nights reviewing my cases," he began, his voice heavy with realization. "My daughter Rachel helped me analyze the patterns. The numbers. They're worse than I imagined." Maya opened her laptop, pulling up her own analysis. "Yes, I've seen the data, but I'm more interested in hearing what you plan to do about it." Harrison leaned forward, opening his folder. "I've drafted a complete overhaul of my courtroom procedures. New guidelines for fines, bail decisions, sentencing recommendations." He paused, looking directly at her. "But first, I owe you a real apology." "Judge Harrison," Maya interrupted gently, "this isn't about me or that traffic ticket." "No, please," he held up his hand. "I need to say this." He took a deep breath. "That day in traffic court, I didn't see Dr. Maya Richardson, the Oxford scholar. I saw what my biases wanted me to see. I've been doing that for years, telling myself I was being fair, objective. I wasn't." Maya studied him carefully. In her years of researching judicial bias, she had met many judges, but few who truly confronted their own prejudices. "What changed?" she asked. "Everything," he replied, pulling out a specific page from his folder. "Look at these numbers. In traffic court alone, I fined minorities an average of 60% more than white defendants for the same violations. How many families did I hurt? How many people had to choose between paying my excessive fines and buying groceries?" Maya picked up the page, noting his meticulous analysis. "These are pretty thorough statistics." "Rachel, my daughter. She's been trying to tell me about these issues for years. I didn't listen." He smiled sadly. "Sometimes it takes a public embarrassment to open your eyes." "And now that your eyes are open," Maya pressed. "I want to be part of your study," he replied. "Not just as a subject, but as an active participant. I want to help design the training programs. My mistakes. They could be valuable teaching tools." Maya leaned back in her chair, considering his words. Through her window, she could see students crossing the campus quad, their lives intersecting in countless ways. "You understand this won't be easy," she said finally. "Your cooperation means publicly acknowledging these patterns." "I know," he nodded. "I'm ready." For the next hour, they discussed specific changes. A new matrix for determining fines based solely on the offense and ability to pay, regular statistical reviews of all decisions, community oversight panels, implicit bias training for all court staff. As their meeting drew to a close, Judge Harrison pulled one last document from his folder. "I've also submitted this to the Chief Justice," he said, sliding it across the desk. "It's my recommendation that all my traffic court decisions from the past year be reviewed by an independent panel." Maya picked up the document, surprised by the thoroughness of his proposal. This could affect hundreds of cases. "Thousands," he corrected. "And it should. Justice delayed is justice denied, but injustice unaddressed is just ongoing harm." As Judge Harrison stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Dr. Richardson, that day in traffic court, you could have just paid the fine and let it go. Thank you for not doing that." Maya smiled. "Change happens one conversation at a time, Judge Harrison. Sometimes it just needs a catalyst." After he left, Maya added his proposal to her growing file of reform initiatives. Outside her window, the morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the campus. Sometimes, she reflected, the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, like a parking ticket on an ordinary autumn morning. 6 months had passed since the traffic court incident, and the Burlington courthouse looked different now. New signs in multiple languages welcomed visitors, and a community help desk staffed by volunteers assisted people with paperwork. But the biggest changes weren't visible to the eye. Judge William Harrison stood before a packed room in the courthouse's main conference hall, facing 30 fellow judges from across the state. His hands were steady as he clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showing his own past sentencing data. "These were my blind spots," he explained, pointing to the glaring disparities in his decisions. "For 15 years, I told myself I was being fair. The numbers tell a different story." In the back of the room, Dr. Maya Richardson watched quietly. This was the third judicial training session she had observed, but it was different seeing Judge Harrison lead it. He had become an unexpected champion for change, using his own experience to reach other judges who might have dismissed a younger or less established voice. "Last month," Harrison continued, "We implemented new standardized fine guidelines in my courtroom. Every decision is now reviewed for bias. The results?" He clicked to the next slide. Fine disparities have dropped by 85% in just 4 months. A hand rose from the audience. But doesn't this standardization remove judicial discretion? No, Harrison replied firmly. It removes unconscious bias. We still have discretion, but now we have to explicitly justify any deviation from the guidelines. The question isn't whether we have bias, we all do. The question is whether we're willing to put systems in place to counter it. During the lunch break, Maya walked through the courthouse hallways with Professor Wilson. Signs of change were everywhere. New bail assessment forms that emphasized flight risk factors rather than economic status, clear posting of fine guidelines, and most importantly, a weekly statistical review of all judicial decisions posted publicly. The State Bar Association wants to make this training mandatory, Wilson mentioned, checking his phone. 3 other states have already contacted us about implementing similar programs. Maya nodded, remembering the flood of emails in her inbox from courts across the country. What had started in Burlington was spreading, creating ripples through the judicial system nationwide. Back in his courtroom that afternoon, Judge Harrison handled his traffic court docket differently than he had 6 months ago. Each defendant received a clear explanation of the standardized fines. Payment plans were offered based on income, not judicial whim. A court translator stood ready to assist non-English speakers. Case number 475, his clerk announced. Expired meter violation. A young white man in an expensive suit approached the bench, looking confident. The old Judge Harrison might have reduced his fine with barely a thought. The new Judge Harrison consulted the standardized guidelines. The fine is $50, he stated clearly. Based on your stated income, you don't qualify for a reduction or payment plan. Do you understand the basis for this decision? In the gallery, several law students took notes. Judge Harrison's courtroom had become a teaching space, where future lawyers learned what reform justice looked like in practice. After court adjourned, Harrison met with his review committee, a diverse group of community members who analyzed his weekly decisions for any signs of returning bias. Rachel, his daughter, often joined these meetings via video call, offering her expertise as a civil rights attorney. "Your numbers are holding steady, Dad," Rachel reported, showing the latest analysis. No statistically significant disparities in the last 3 months. But it wasn't just about numbers. The atmosphere in the courthouse had changed. Defendants left feeling heard, even when the decisions went against them. Staff members spoke up when they noticed potential bias. Other judges began requesting transfers to Burlington to learn from the program. That evening, as Judge Harrison prepared to leave, he noticed Dr. Richardson waiting near his office. "The training went well today," she said. "You're reaching them in a way I never could." Harrison shook his head. "I'm just sharing my mistakes. You're the one who built the framework for real change." Maya smiled. Change needs both, the framework and the personal story. Together, they're pretty powerful. As they walked out of the courthouse, they passed the spot where their paths had first crossed over a parking ticket. The sign that had caused all the trouble had been replaced with a clearer one, along with information about payment assistance programs. Sometimes, Harrison mused, looking at the new sign, our worst moments lead to our best changes. Maya nodded, thinking of all the courts across the country now implementing similar reforms. And sometimes, justice just needs a little push to move in the right direction. 1 year after the parking ticket incident, the Burlington courthouse hosted a national conference on judicial reform. Judges, lawyers, and activists from across the country filled the main hall, eager to learn about what the media had dubbed the Burlington model. Dr. Maya Richardson stood at the podium, her presentation showing remarkable statistics from the past year. Behind her, a large screen displayed dramatic changes in court data, a 90% reduction in racial disparities for traffic fines, a 75% decrease in bias-related complaints, and significantly improved community trust scores. But numbers only tell part of the story, Maya said, gesturing to the diverse audience. The real change is in how justice is delivered every day in courtrooms across our city. In the front row, Judge William Harrison sat with his daughter Rachel. His hair had more gray now, but his eyes were clearer, more purposeful. The past year had transformed him from a symbol of judicial bias to a nationally recognized advocate for reform. "I'd like to invite Judge Harrison to share his perspective," Maya announced, stepping aside from the podium. As Harrison walked up, he remembered how different things had been just 1 year ago. His courthouse now served as a training ground for judges nationwide. Every month, new observers came to study their methods, taking ideas back to their own jurisdictions. "When Dr. Richardson first entered my courtroom," he began, "I was part of the problem. Today, I'm proud to be part of the solution." He clicked to a new slide showing the changes they'd implemented. "Every decision we make is now reviewed for bias. Every fine is based on clear guidelines. Every interaction is treated as an opportunity for justice to work as it should." In the audience, Sarah Chen from the Burlington Daily Press took notes for her follow-up story. Her original article about the parking ticket incident had won a regional journalism award and sparked similar investigations in other cities. After the presentations, Maya walked through the courthouse halls with Professor Wilson. The building had become a model of accessibility, with clear signage in multiple languages, community assistance desks, and transparent posting of all court procedures and decisions. "Oxford called again," Wilson mentioned. "They want to expand your research to courts in Europe and Asia." Maya nodded, thinking of how far things had come. What started here is becoming a global conversation about justice. Later that afternoon, Judge Harrison presided over his regular traffic court session, now routinely observed by visiting legal professionals. Each case was handled with the same careful attention to fairness, regardless of who stood before him. A young black woman approached for a parking violation, coincidentally, at the same meter where Maya had parked a year ago. Harrison followed the standardized procedures they had developed, explaining the fine structure and payment options clearly. "Your Honor," the woman said, "I've heard about the changes you've made here. Thank you for making this court a fair place for everyone." After court adjourned, Harrison met with Maya in his office for their final meeting before she returned to Oxford. The walls, once decorated with his own achievements, now displayed framed copies of their reform guidelines and community feedback statistics. "The Supreme Court is implementing our model statewide," he told her, showing the latest directive. 5 other states have already passed similar reforms. Maya smiled, remembering their first real conversation in her university office. "When I came to Burlington, I thought I'd be studying bias. Instead, we created a blueprint for changing it." As they walked out of the courthouse together, they passed Reverend Thompson leading a community oversight meeting in the conference room. The voices of diverse community members mixed with those of court officials, working together to maintain and improve the new systems. Outside, the autumn air felt crisp, just like it had that first morning. The old parking meter had been replaced with a new digital system that accepted multiple payment methods and offered clear instructions in several languages. A small but symbolic change. "What's next?" Harrison asked, looking at the courthouse that had been his workplace for decades, but now felt like a completely different place. "The work is never really finished," Maya replied, checking her phone full of messages from courts around the world wanting to learn from their experience. "But now we know change is possible. Real, measurable, lasting change." As they said their goodbyes, both thought about how a simple parking ticket had sparked a transformation that would impact thousands of lives. Sometimes, they realized, the biggest changes in history start with the smallest moments of injustice met with the courage to demand better. The Burlington courthouse stood tall in the afternoon sun, no longer just a building where justice was proclaimed, but a place where justice was actually delivered, fairly, transparently, and equally for all.